Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, March the 4th, 2021. I want to first talk about Pepe Le Pew. Yes, that's right. The beloved Warner Brothers cartoon character who is now being threatened with cancellation by none other than Charles Blow of the New York Times. So, this is pretty serious. He has a piece in the Times yesterday called Six Seuss Books Bore a Bias. Okay. Racism must be exorcised from culture, including or maybe especially from children's culture. Yes, must be. Little man, must is not a word to be addressed to princes. He begins, as a child, I was led to believe that blackness was inferior, and I was not alone. The black society into which I was born was riddled with these beliefs. It wasn't something that most, if any, would articulate in that way, let alone knowingly propagate. Rather, it was in the air, in the culture. I suppose you could say a miasma, in other words. We had been trained in it, bathed in it, acculturated to hate ourselves. It happened for children in the most inconspicuous of ways. It was relayed through toys and dolls, cartoons and children's shows, fairy tales and children's books. At every turn, at every moment, I was being baptized in the narrative that everything white was right, good, noble, and beautiful, and everything black was the opposite. Really what Charles M. Blow got from his survey of popular culture, that everything white was right, good, noble, and beautiful. And there's an enormous number of movies and television shows back in the old days, the bad old days, consisted of white people doing bad things, but never mind that. The first book I ever bought was a children's book about Job from the Bible. Job was the whitest of white men in the book, and so was the white savior with white beard lounging on a cloud. Indeed, every image I saw of Christianity featured white people. My great uncle had a picture of a stringy-haired, blue-eyed white Jesus hanging over his bed. I get the impression that Charles Blow has forgotten his children's book about Job. Job does not get a particularly easy ride in the Bible, not at all. Despite his righteousness, he continues to be persecuted. But I digress. Some of the first cartoons I can remember included Pepe Le Pew, who normalized rape culture, Speedy Gonzales, whose friends helped popularize the corrosive stereotype of the drunk and lethargic Mexicans, and Mammy Two Shoes, a heavy-set black maid who spoke in a heavy accent. I've spent an awful lot of time watching cartoons, classic cartoons. I don't recall this Mammy Two Shoes character. Reruns were a fixture in the pre-cable days, so I watched children's shows like Tarzan, about a half-naked white man in the middle of an African jungle who conquers and tames it and outwits the black people there, who are all portrayed as primitive, if not savage. I watched the Our Gang, Little Rascal shorts, in which the buckwheat character summoned all the stereotypes of the pickaninny. And of course, I watched Westerns that regularly depicted Native Americans as aggressive, bloodthirsty savages against whom valiant white men were forced to fight. As James Baldwin put it in a 1965 essay, quote, "In the case of the American Negro, from the moment you are born, every stick and stone, every face is white. So you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5, 6, or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to see Gary Cooper killing off the Indians, and although you are rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians are you." Okay. The reason that blacks were, in fact, imported to the New World as slaves is because the Indians refused to give in to servitude. Am I really supposed to believe that James Baldwin, even at the age of 5, 6, or 7, did not know that he was black? Because he would look around at the faces of his family and they were all black. So why would he be different? But as the Equal Justice Initiative points out, throughout history, Native people have been subjected to more than 1,500 wars, attacks, and raids authorized by the United States government. Under the guise of expanding civilization, the drive to amass land and widen borders incited decades of racial genocide. In elementary school, we celebrated Columbus Day by coloring pictures of happy, smiling white man in his 3 boats, not knowing that Columbus was a brutal enslaver and slave trader, and who wrote in 1500 of enslaved women and girls, 100 castellanos are easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. And in fact, it is in the early days that we become conscious of race. Apparently James Baldwin didn't, though. And it is then that we can begin to assign value to it. As the American Psychological Association pointed out last year, new research indicates, quote, adults in the United States believe children should be almost 5 years old before talking with them about race, even though some infants are aware of race and preschoolers may have already developed racist beliefs, unquote. I was a teenager before I could start to understand what had been done to me, that I'd been taught to hate myself, and for me to start to reverse it. The most illuminating and sad realization came when I became aware of the doll tests, in which very young children were presented with a white doll and a black one and asked to describe each. Most of the children preferred the white dolls and described them positively. About 30 years ago, in my own version of the experiment, I grabbed an old yearbook from a school I attended whose student body was roughly evenly split between white and black students. I gave it to my nephew, who was 4 or 5 years old, and told him to point to the people he thought were pretty. Every face on which that little brown finger landed was white. It underscored for me that the things we present children with, believing them innocent, can be corrosive and racially vicious. So this week, when the company that controls Dr. Seuss books announced that they would no longer publish 6 of the books because of racist and insensitive imagery, saying these books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong, I cheered as some bemoaned another victim of so-called cancel culture. I guess they don't have editors at the New York Times. So-called and then cancel culture is in scare quotes, one or the other. If you have the scare quotes, you don't need the so-called. If you have so-called, you don't need the scare quotes. But he concludes racism must be exorcised from culture, you see, because white people are devils, including, or maybe especially from children's literature. Teaching a child to hate or be ashamed of themselves is a sin against their innocence and a weight against their possibilities. Yes, I'm looking forward to Charles Amblo's second memoir. Yes, I'm still an insufferable crybaby. Deal with it. Let's see, what do we know about Pepe Le Pew? According to Wikipedia, Pepe Le Pew is a character from the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes and Merry Melody series of cartoons, first introduced in 1945. Depicted as a French striped skunk, Pepe is constantly on the quest for love. However, his offensive skunk odor and his aggressive pursuit of romance typically cause other characters to run from him. Pepe Le Pew storylines typically involve Pepe in pursuit of a female black cat whom Pepe mistakes for a skunk. La belle femme skunk fatale. The cat, who was retroactively named Penelope Pussycat, often has a white stripe painted down her back, usually by accident. Penelope frantically races to get away from him because of his putrid odor, his overly aggressive manner, or both, while Pepe hops after her at a leisurely pace. In a role reversal, the Academy Award-winning 1949 short for sentimental reasons ended with an accidentally painted blue and now terrified Pepe being pursued by a madly smitten Penelope, who has been dunked in dirty water, leaving her with a ratty appearance and a developing head cold, completely clogging up her nose. It turns out that Pepe's new color is just right for her, plus the fact that the blue paint now covers his putrid scent. Penelope locks him up inside a perfume shop, hiding the key down her chest, and proceeds to chase the now imprisoned and effectively odorless Pepe. Oh dear, is that normalizing rape culture as well? Let's see. Manic Skin, or VDR, comments, Pepe Le Pew was just what Americans used to think every Frenchman actually was in daily life. I'm surprised that Charles M. Blow didn't hammer at Warner Brothers for the constant drag routines in Bugs Bunny cartoons, so very offensive to transsexuals. Let's see, Westerns. Well, the white man, the colonizers, were in a fight to the death with the Indians. The Indians hated the white man, and the white man hated the Indians because only one of them could prevail. But in any event, he refers to Westerns that regularly depicted Native Americans as aggressive, bloodthirsty savages against whom valiant white men were forced to fight. Well, if you look at The Searchers by John Ford, you see that John Wayne's character, who hates the Comanche with a obsessive passion, is shown as being close to deranged. If you look at other John Ford films, Fort Apache, for instance, it is Henry Ford who is the villain of the piece, not the Apache Indians, who are shown to be people who, when they give their word, honor it. And they honor bravery. They honor John Wayne and spare him and the rest of the troop because he has been fair to them. That film also rails against a corrupt Indian agent who plies the Indians with rot gut whiskey. But in any event, by the 1960s, we had a new crop of Westerns, which typically showed the Indians as, as the honorable people. In fact, if you watch shows like Bonanza or Gunsmoke or The Rifleman or Wagon Train or anything like that, you will find that in shows dealing with Native Indians, there's always one fellow who refers to them as drunken and no good, et cetera, et cetera. And it is so over the top that he might as well have a sign hanging around his neck that says, "I'm the baddie." You know, there were very few Black people in American culture until the late 1960s, early 1970s. Perhaps that's what Charles M. Blow is so upset about. But I really wonder, it's curious to me that now we're upset about these things. Now we are. Because, let's see, Pepe Le Pew begins in 1945, and feminism was exceedingly strong in the United States from the late 60s. But now, apparently, Pepe Le Pew must be canceled. As far as the Little Rascals go, wow, this is a new one to me. This is a new one to me. As far as James Baldwin is concerned, actually, it wasn't the Blacks who were being killed in the United States. Yes, it was the Indians, because the Blacks were considered valuable and the Indians were not. Doesn't Charles M. Blow have enough to complain about being a Black man without dragging the Indians into it? Isn't this cultural appropriation? Yeah, okay. So I have been talking. Oh, let's go to the chat first. Let's go to the chat. Okay, hello to And Run Roulette Cracked, Dan Pelcasso 88, Tricky Who, and Head McNeck. Tricky Who says, "Stop hating yourself. It's that simple." Actually, surveys have shown for a very long time that the group of Americans with the highest self-esteem are young Black people. God knows why. Apparently, the culture has told them that they must hate themselves. The old culture of which Charles M. Blow rails at pretty much ignored Black people almost completely. White people were not interested in Black people for the most part. White people in America now pretend to be interested in them, but I don't believe it. If white liberals, white leftists actually cared about the condition of blacks in America, then the conditions in American inner cities would be considered a scandal, but they are simply not. What happens in Detroit, Baltimore, Newark, and other places is simply ignored because it is too horrible to contemplate, and there is nothing that can be done about it. Head McNack says apparently Job was white. Wow, just wow. Jonathan Pohl, perhaps you can explain this to me, Pepe Le Pew versus Papa JF. I don't understand. I saw the reference earlier today. I don't understand it. Anrun says, how come my man Foghorn Leghorn hasn't been canceled yet? Yes, this very offensive catchphrase, boy. I said boy. Ooh, which obviously conjures up horrible memories in black people. Of course, Foghorn Leghorn said that to everyone, but never mind. Okay. Yako Rapala, our Finnish friend, says, I'm rooting for China at this point. They're less Marxist than the West. Anran says, what about Three Dog Nights? The ink is black, the page is white. Together they learn to read and write. Racist too now, I guess. Of course, there's Jerry Seinfeld's famous black and white cookie. Learn from the cookie. Head McNeck says there were 400,000 blacks brought to America today. There are 40 million. If that's genocide, can we white folks please have some, please? Yeah, well, no, obviously. No genocide. Deep analysis of Pepe Le Pew. Thank you. Chogokin666 says his brother Curtis Blow was much cooler. He style says outrage seems to take 3 to 4 generations to take place. Professor Paul says Buffalo Soldiers were key in subjugating the Indians. John from Beyond says, I personally know several people who have taken the new gene therapy injections. I'll be keeping a close eye on them over the next few months. Half Galician says, I'm a Daffy Duck man, as am I. I would like to be more like Bugs Bunny, but unfortunately, I'm more like Daffy Duck. So I have been saying, or railing, if you will, for some time, that if you're worried about cancel culture, it's time to start buying physical media, particularly when it comes to TV shows and movies, because there's a serious question of how long a great many of our most beloved entertainments are going to be allowed to exist. This is not an exaggeration on my part. The scandal, if you will, over Gone with the Wind, what was that, last year, 2 years ago? Gone with the Wind was a film made in 1939. Gives us an indication of where this is going. But yes, I remain silent when they canceled Pepe Le Pew, or when they canceled Gone with the Wind. And, now that they're coming for Pepe Le Pew, ooh, I don't know. It's too late. This is from Breitbart. Loving classic films can be a fraught pastime. Just consider the cultural firestorm over Gone with the Wind this past summer. Oh, it was last year. All right. No one knows this better than the film lovers at Turner Classic Movies, who daily are confronted with the complicated reality that many of old Hollywood's most celebrated films are often a kitchen sink of stereotypes. Oh, sorry. This is not from Breitbart. This is from the Associated Press. A kitchen sink of stereotypes. And stereotypes are bad because this summer, amid the Black Lives Matter protests, the channel's programmers and hosts decided to do something about it. The result is a new series, Reframed Classics, which promises wide-ranging discussions about 18 culturally significant films from the 1920s through the 1960s that also have problematic aspects. From Breakfast at Tiffany's and Mickey Rooney's performance as Mr. Yunioshi to Fred Astaire's blackface routine in Swing Time, it kicks off Thursday with none other than Gone with the Wind. We know millions of people love these films, says TCM host Jacqueline Stewart, who is participating in many of the conversations. We're not saying this is how you should feel about Psycho, or this is how you should feel about Gone with the Wind. Psycho? What? Yeah. We're just trying to model ways of having longer and deeper conversations and not just cutting it off to, I love this movie, I hate this movie. There's so much space in between. Stewart, a University of Chicago professor who in 2019 became the channel's first African-American host, has spent her career studying classic films, particularly those in the silent era and Black audiences. She knows firsthand the tension of loving films that also contain racial stereotypes. She says, I grew up in a family of people who loved classic films. Now, how can you love these films if you know there's going to be a maid or mammy that shows up? Stewart said, well, I grew up around people who could still love the movie. You appreciate some parts of it. You critique other parts of it. That's something that one can do. And it actually can enrich your experience of the film. Well, this reminds me of, what was it, about 15 years ago or so, that Walt Disney brought out a bunch of box sets of Disney treasures. They're back in the vault. I should have mentioned when I talked about 12 O'Clock High, I was rather surprised to find out that it's not available in Blu-ray. And then I realized, oh yes, Fox is owned by Disney now. So they've put 12 O'Clock High in the vault. Disney has made a habit of keeping things unavailable in order to heighten anticipation for the eventual re-release. So for these Disney treasures, there were some of cartoons from the 1930s that were deemed problematical. And so they handed a check to Whoopi Goldberg in order to say, well, yes, these are offensive, but we can't just erase, or as Charles M. Blow would say, exorcise them. Curious thing, there was one that, the uncut. So I watched a Big Bad Wolf cartoon with three little pigs. And what's problematical about this? And then I find out you have to go to a different place on the disc to find the problematical version, in which the Big Bad Wolf attempts to enter the pig's house by posing as a Jewish peddler. And I thought, how many decades has it been since there were Jewish peddlers? Who would even recognize this reference? Oh, wait a minute. During the My Fair Lady conversation on March 25th, they talk about why the film adaptation has a less feminist ending than the stage play and Henry Higgins' physical and psychological abuse of Eliza Doolittle. Not feeding her and stuffing marbles in her mouth are played for cute laughs in the film. Is this a commentary on misogyny or just plain misogyny? In the series, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho will face scrutiny about its depictions of transgender identity and gender fluidity in conjunction with mental illness and violence. Oh, yes, now I see. Because we know, I guess Basic Instinct, runs into kind of a similar problem. We know that transsexuals are never, ever, ever crazy. I mean, come on. Norman Bates, something like that never happened. Could never happen. And on the Guess Who's Coming to Dinner night, airing March 11th, Stewart discusses the complex legacy of Sidney Poitier. Quote, his career is so important for the ways that white Americans really started to have more sympathy and understanding of Black people. But at the same time, there are aspects of his films that are clearly oriented primarily to white audiences. That opens up all kinds of complications for Black viewers who felt that he wasn't a representative of the race as a whole. Well, yes, I grew up on Sidney Poitier movies, and as a result, I suppose I formed a positive opinion of Black people. But that's a bad thing now. I guess it is. This is a big story. It's covered by the Wrap as well. Brian Welk, movies like Gone with the Wind, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and John Wayne's The Searchers are all-time Hollywood classics and beloved by many, but they also have material touching on their depiction of non-white characters that could make audiences cringe, especially in 2021. Yes, well, audiences in 2021 are so fragile that if they hear the word fireman or policeman, they will cringe or perhaps burst into tears. It's not about censoring the film. It's not about treating your audience as though they're not intelligent enough to see the issues. And it's not putting a child-proof lock on the movie or caution label. Alicia Malone, one of the hosts of the Reframe series, told The Wrap, it's about giving it some context. TCM host Jacqueline Stewart recently filmed an introduction to Run Before Gone with the Wind on HBO Max that discusses how the film romanticizes the Antebellum South. In the spirit of the series, Tabesh actually recommended that HBO Max include a video intro of someone talking about Gone with the Wind rather than a simple warning label or disclaimer calling it objectionable. The film romanticizes the Antebellum South. Well, I suppose in a way that it does, but Clark Gable tells the young Confederate bucks right at the very beginning that they're fools, that the South cannot possibly prevail over the North, and they are inviting their own destruction. A destruction which we see depicted memorably in the film, including the burning of Atlanta and the long trail of the Confederate dead, and the destruction of Tara, the O'Hara family home. Yes, I think there's a lot of context and nuance in that film already. Let's see, some films on the list you may have not thought about as problematic. Yep, but we're going to show you. Katharine Hepburn's Woman of the Year is an early example of a strong feminist character, but one who gives up her career to become a housewife struggling to make toast for her husband. No, we can't have career women leaving the workforce. That's evil. Women were born to be wage slaves. Everybody knows that. Oh, and then there's 1954's Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which Malone called a delightful musical, but involves a lot of kidnapping of women. Oh, and Psycho, brought up again by Malone. What does it mean if you have a character who is dressing up in a film and is the scary monster of the movie? How does that make audiences think about transgender people when they meet them in real life? What does it say about womanhood in general? That's one I've started to think about differently in the past couple of years. It doesn't mean I don't still love it for all the reasons why it should be enjoyed, but it's just given me another layer on top of it. No one gave a moment's thought to this until about 5 minutes ago. But yes, another boutique enthusiasm, which has become an iron law. And another story from the Hollywood Reporter, racist, sexist classic, how Hollywood is dealing with its problematic content. As streamers build out their lucrative libraries, they're experimenting with label warnings, context panels, and even purges. These are valuable properties that you cannot just disregard. You want to keep them, but you have to make sure they don't damage the brand. Every month, Disney convenes an eclectic group of advisors via video conference to tell the media conglomerate what it and the many entertainment companies it has acquired over its nearly 100-year history have gotten wrong. It's a long list. Song of the South. That film has been unavailable for decades. Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks is problematic because, okay, that episode of The Muppet Show where Johnny Cash sings a duet with Miss Piggy in front of a Confederate flag. You know, I think that if Johnny Cash, well, he wouldn't have done it, but if someone else had sung a duet with Miss Piggy in front of a pentagram, this would now be considered less offensive than a Confederate flag. Some shows and films, like certain episodes of The Muppet Show that Disney added to its streaming platform February 19th, have ended up with disclaimers cautioning viewers. Nobody's canceling this movie, says Turner Classic Movies host Ben Mankiewicz, who is very definitely the weakest link on that station. Our job is not to get up and say, here's a movie you should feel guilty about for liking, then why are there disclaimers? But to pretend that the racism in it is not painful and acute? No, I do not want to shy away from that. This was inevitable and welcomed. Well, TCM has been showing Gone with the Wind, for decades now. And was Ben Mankiewicz making these groveling noises in the past? If not, why not? As far as Warner Brothers cartoons goes, There is the Golden Collection, which is in 6 volumes on DVD, which I highly recommend, which you can get from England. Well, you can get it in America and Canada, but you can get it in England at a much lower price. And then there's the Platinum Collection on Blu-ray, which I recommend even more strongly. And my advice is to get these things while you can. Because when they say they're not canceling these things, they're lying, because they are going to. They're going to, and the disclaimers are simply, a little buffer there. They'll get around to it. Oh, let's see. An intro Mankiewicz shot for the 1957 film Face in the Crowd upset conservatives back in 2010. For comparisons, the host drew between the cult of celebrity culture in the film and the state of contemporary political commentary. The goateed one can interpret the meaning of Elia Kazan's masterpiece in today's world all he wants, but he needs to keep that interpretation to himself and show his viewers the respect of allowing us to interpret it for our own selves, wrote conservative blogger John Nolte at the time. Kermit canceled, asked a headline on the conservative website The Daily Wire when Disney rolled out disclaimers on 18 episodes of The Muppet Show. When the host of Fox News, Fox and Friends, asked Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton about the disclaimers on February 24th, the lawmaker brought up the studio's relationship with China and its thanking of government agencies in a province that is home to detention camps that house Uyghur Muslims in the credits for its 2020 China set adventure, Mulan. Cotton pointed out that the company's business interests matter most above anything. They don't take these things down, the senator said of Muppet Show episodes. They still want that $12.99 a month. Disney Plus is actually $6.99 a month. Oh, what else is in trouble? Dumbo, The Jungle Book, Aladdin, Song of the South. Yeah. Song of the South, not available. Uh-oh, The Princess and the Frog. Oh, 30 Rock, The Office, The Golden Girls, Mad Men, Tropic Thunder, all in very serious trouble now. As I've said previously, I think one of the reasons why these old productions are in trouble is simply because they are old. The hatred of anything before the day before yesterday is now firmly entrenched in our culture. And you see this even amongst film critics. The famous example of one of them complaining about cultural vegetables. Oh, some lost silent classic has been found. Oh, do I have to watch this? No, of course you don't have to watch it. But one would think that as a film critic, the return of a thought-lost classic would be an occasion of happiness and not regret. Just to give an indication how recent this is, Warner Todd Houston writes in Breitbart, with iconic children's book author Dr. Seuss in the crosshairs of the cancel culture left, a Virginia school removed Dr. Seuss books from its Read Across America program, Joe Biden leaving Dr. Seuss's name off his presidential proclamation. 6 of the author's books were pulled from publication for racist and insensitive depictions. A slew of Hollywood celebrities are being put on the spot as they have spent years reading the good doctor's books on tape. Amazon ebook seller Audible lists 30 results featuring Dr. Seuss books read by celebrities. The top celebrities are listed as reading Dr. Seuss titles, including Green Eggs and Ham, Fox and Socks, Dr. Seuss's ABC, The Cat in the Hat, and many more. The list includes Frasier stars Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce, Seinfeld star Jason Alexander, Cheers star Ted Danson. Well, I guess he has a blackface problem of his own. How he managed to survive that speech that he gave about Whoopi Goldberg in public, this has pretty much been scrubbed from the internet. But look up Ted Danson, Whoopi Goldberg, and Spy Magazine, and I can assure you, you will be genuinely shocked. Who else read Dr. Seuss? John Cleese, John Lithgow, Billy Crystal, Dustin Hoffman, Walter Matthau, Mercedes McCambridge, Michael McKean, Neil Patrick Harris, Angelica Houston, Jason Lee, Peter Dinklage, William H. Macy, Joan Cusack, Edward Harriman, Samira Wiley, Rainn Wilson, Chris Cox, Charles Cohen, and David Walliams. I guess they've got a lot of splaining to do. Let's go back to the chat. Head McNeck says Ralph Bakshi. Yes. Jonathan Pohl says Bakshi gets a pass just like SBC due to being Israeli. Crumb will be canceled. Couldn't Crumb claim some sort of autistic privilege? I mean, he's clearly not, normal, right? Of course, I've never thought so. People might disagree. Okay. Metal Mike says, absolutely, my WKRP box set is prized. Picasso 88, let's get physical. Warner Brothers cartoons were my favorite as a kid. Sad to see it disappear. Well, is that fellow Ain't It News website, Ain't It Cool website? I interviewed him years ago about these Warner Brothers cartoons, and he told me authoritatively that Warner Brothers was never going to release them on DVD restored because it would cost too much money and the market was too small. Well, he was definitely wrong about that. And there have been rumors as recently as a few years ago that Warner Brothers intended to release the Warner Brothers examples of the censored 11 on a disc, and maybe they get Whoopi Goldberg in there or some other famous black person. They hand that person a check and say, can you make this all right for us? But of course, that's out of the question. Now, Matthew Gubbins says, local bookstore owner told me people were lined up to buy all his Dr. Seuss books. Tom Anderson says, Cardi B's WAP is praised while Dr. Seuss is offensive. Afghalician says, All in the Family airs on MeTV weekends. They display a disclaimer before each episode. As everyone knows, I'm a fan of MeTV, or some of the shows on it. I don't watch All in the Family because I can't stand that show. And Carol O'Connor is just about the Twinkling Irishman is about the worst possible choice for a lumpenproll Protestant possible. Tom Anderson says blackface was popularized by the movie The Jazz Singer. Well, actually, blackface was exceedingly popular in the United States going back to the days of Stephen Foster, in the 1850s. One could argue that minstrel shows actually, they were pretty sympathetic to black people, and they introduced white Americans to black culture. But of course, that argument is not going to stand now. Palpicasso 88 says Norman Bates, the original incel. Tom Anderson says, the film about the son of a rabbi who wants to be a jazz singer, but his dad is against the idea. And of course, there was a famous Warner Brothers parody about a singing owl. And no jazz, the Germanic dad says. And there was a remake with Neil Diamond playing the Al Jolson role. When Disney buys YouTube, they will put KMG in the vault. Roulette Crack says, I'm so hungover the chat is blurred, or is it same for everyone? Yako Raipala says, fun fact, insane cross-dressing villains are based on a very real-life example, Ed Gein. But every video connecting autogynophilia and that man gets erased from YouTube. Professor Paul says Ed Gein also made human skin masks, didn't he? Palpicasso 88 says De Palma's Dress to Kill, which stars Michael Caine, is also very problematic. Yako Rapala says, yes, Ed Gein was making a real-life woman suit and dreaming of turning into a woman, but there was a big sweep of true crime video censorship that erased every video that mentioned his cross-dressing. Now, the Silence of the Lambs. I've read the novel, and Thomas Harris just turns himself into a pretzel explaining that the murderous cross-dresser in Buffalo Bill in the movie. See, he's not a real transsexual. In fact, he didn't make the protocol, you see, because he was too crazy, apparently. Okay. But I don't think that that's going to save Silence of the Lambs. When will manhole covers be renamed, says Jonathan Pohl. Pepe Le Pew, who normalized rape culture, says Dramares, you can stop reporting these stories now, good sir. Please, for the love of God, stop. Oh, well, yeah. I'm giving you news you can use, as they used to say, which is, oh, yeah, this is just a fad. It's not. It's not a fad. There are so many episodes of The Office, say, particularly those that deal with Michael Scott's love of Chris Rock routines. Oh, yes, that's the same episode where he adopts a stereotypically East Indian accent and screams the same made-up phrase, nonsense phrase in, what's her name, Mindy Kaling's face over and over again. I don't know how, I think a lot of The Office episodes are going to be canceled. Again, from Yako Rapala, true crime videos are a dumb obsession of mine, and they've been getting hit hard by YouTube censors. Obviously, real-life crime stories are very often politically incorrect. Jesus Stahl says, I'm amazed by the fragility by people over past views, disclaimers, and trigger warnings. I remember watching World War II footage as a kid and not needing a safe space for seeing concentration camps on PBS. Back in the 1990s, late 80s or 1990s, PBS actually showed an abortion, a real live abortion on TV. And I don't recall being bombarded with the trigger warnings about that. Of course, anyone watching a documentary about abortion is going to know straight up it's a very nasty business. Okay. What else do we have here? Never cared for the American Office, says Chogokin 666. No, I don't like it as much as the British Office, but that show was meant to be short. It's like Britta says on Community. You see, the best thing about these British shows is that they give you closure. As in, they only made 6 episodes of Cougarton Abbey. Yeah. But Michael Scott, we're supposed to find him a lovable character, actually. He fake fired Pam twice. He's childish, obnoxious, just absolutely unbearable. In real life, this fellow would have been beaten like on a weekly basis, whereas Ed Helms' character would have been beaten to death. He's so insufferable. Kyle Chida says, how much are the Apprentice DVDs going for these days? Roulette Crack says, if they put all these books in the blockchain, they can never be canceled. Chogokin 666 speaks up for Carol O'Connor's great authenticity. Okay, let's get back to it here. And we are going to talk more about Vilfredo Pareto from James Burnham's The Machiavellians. In about 45 minutes, I am going to be discussing Michelangelo's Blow Up. Burnham writes, we may note that so far as social development is determined by such factors as climate, geography, and in general by biological and physical characteristics, it is non-logically motivated. Temperature, rainfall, mountains, and valleys are not logical products. They are simply given as the environment wherein human society develops. Few theorists nowadays would accept any of the extreme doctrines that try to explain all history by a single principle of climate or race or something of the sort. But few would deny that these have at least some influence on social change. It might, however, be argued that when interpreting social change, we accept the physical and biological factors as historically irrelevant constants, and that within the conditions which they admittedly set, logical conduct functions to decide what happens in history. These social goals, ideals, or purposes that men presumably try to achieve in political and social life are capable of being put into words. Especially in modern times, those goals that are of the widest significance and that are professed by great numbers of men are often written into great public documents: constitutions, programs, codes, declarations, charters, and so on. These public goals, so expressed, are decisive for our present investigation. If the conduct that influences social change is logical, then these constitutions, declarations, and charters, together with the human activities associated them, will meet, at least to a considerable degree and a good part of the time, the tests that we have listed for logical conduct. Let us see what the facts are. First, we may at once observe that most of the goals incorporated in these public documents are too ambiguous to determine one line of conduct as against another. They are so vague, indeed, that whatever is actually done can be subsequently interpreted as consistent with the alleged goal. The declarations call often for freedom, but freedom by itself is a term with no content whatsoever. There is no freedom in general, only freedom from certain things or for certain things, which always involves restrictions in other specific aspects. If I am to be free from being murdered by private individuals, then you are not free to murder me. If the state is free to compel sales of commodities at set prices, then the manufacturer is not free to sell them as he chooses. If an owner is free to do what he wants with his possessions, then others are not free from the effects of what he does. Or take liberty, equality, and fraternity, the great goals, it was believed, of the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the French Revolution. Anything or nothing can be meant by these terms. No two men are or can be equal in all things. All are equal in some. Michels reminds us that after the Revolution, the three words appeared over the entrance of every French prison. The Atlantic Charter, as drawn up by Churchill and Roosevelt, proclaimed as one of the central aims of the United Nations freedom from want. Such a goal is strictly impossible. Man is, as we observed in another connection, a wanting animal. There is no possible end to his wants except death, as the philosophers of the East have always insisted. The program of a political party declares in favor of law and order. But what law and order, and whose law and order? All sovereignty, the constitutions say, is vested in the people, but the most liberal parliament and the most despotic Bonapartist equally claim to respect the principle of popular sovereignty. The Nazis were to build the new order, but concentration camps and workers' houses were with equal ease interpreted as part of a new order. The United States stands, it is said, for freedom of the seas. But in 1940, let us say, freedom of the seas did not mean freedom for United States ships to sail to German ports, nor freedom for German ships to sail anywhere. Japan was aiming, she said, at a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, but this sphere had no definable limits, nor apparently much of what would normally be called prosperity. The point is not that these slogans, ideals, programs, and declarations do not influence action. Under certain circumstances, they undoubtedly do, and tremendously, but they are not and cannot be part of a logical or rational action. I am not taking logical steps in pursuit of a goal if the presumed goal is nothing definite. I can say, no matter what happens, that I have attained the goal, and you can say I have not. In spite of what I may think, the express goal itself and the deductions I draw from it have no logical relation to what I do. My actions, whatever the appearances, are non-logical and spring not from the goal, but from other sources. Thus, in all cases, and these include the majority that is relevant to social change, where the goals are vague or ambiguous or meaningless, human conduct is non-logical. However, there are other cases where the goal is sufficiently definite for us to determine objectively whether or not the actions taken are in accordance with it. Even in some of the instances cited above, the specific historical context may give a fairly definite meaning to terms, which by themselves are wholly vague. How do matters stand when the goals are at least clear enough to be understood? We discover, to begin with, that men who profess a certain goal are just about as likely to take actions contrary to it as in accordance with it. Nor can we generally attribute these contrary actions to duplicity. To those who act contrary to the goal can continue at the same time believing sincerely in it and not noting any contradiction. One of the 10 Commandments forbids killing, but all Jewish and Christian groups have frequently killed without in the least altering their faith in the commandment. In modern times, there have been many pacifists, but the overwhelming majority of them support all wars in which their countries engage. Soviet Russia did not at all drop its belief in the Marxist ideal of a classless society, while class differentiation steadily developed after the revolution. Communities with the strictest beliefs about monogamy and prohibition and the sinfulness of gambling are always able, in action, to display a good deal of sexual promiscuity, drinking, and gambling. The same attorney general can, on the same day, make an address in favor of free speech and arrest individuals exercising free speech. The same legislator can praise free enterprise while preparing a law for new state controls over enterprise. A political party can get elected on a platform that promises a balanced budget and then use power to run up the biggest deficits in history. Similarly, we may observe that various groups can profess the same goals and yet take differing and often directly conflicting lines of action. Reformist, syndicalist, Trotskyist, and Stalinist parties of the labor movement all cite the same texts of Marx while cutting each other's throats. All Christian nations have the New Testament and the Fathers on their clashing sides. In one state, the seventh commandment forbids capital punishment. In its neighbor, the same commandment justifies capital punishment. England and the United States both believe in freedom of the seas, but for England, this can mean capturing United States ships as contraband, and for the United States, sending them through the blockade. A belief in the immortality of the soul is compatible with a total disregard of material goods, this short life counting nothing against eternity, or total concentration on them, thus attesting, as Calvin taught, that the active soul is elected to blessedness in afterlife. On the other hand, we find that groups can profess different and contrary goals and yet carry out the same type of actions. Pareto cites many fascinating examples. There can be the most varying alleged moral codes governing sexual behavior, and yet just about the same kind of sexual behavior in practice. Intimate personal possessions are placed with dead bodies in the grave, no matter what the belief or lack of any belief concerning an afterlife for the dead. The Soviet Union can be on the same side of a war with England and the United States, and Japan with Germany, even though in both cases the implications of official beliefs forbid the alliances. Germany proclaims doctrines of racial superiority, and the United States condemns them. Nevertheless, the United States acts towards Negroes very much as the Nazis toward Jews, and the United States retains in law and practice the Exclusion Act directed against the yellow races. Stalin can speak in the name of the classless society of communism, Hitler in that of the hierarchical society of the Herrenvolk, but the differences between the Gestapo and the GPU in action are not readily discerned. All these are not examples selected arbitrarily for the sake of proving a thesis. They are chosen at random, and they could be indefinitely added to. Moreover, most of them are not the peculiar quirks of individuals, but involve the important group actions that have a significant bearing upon what happens in government and society. If the analysis of these and similar actions shows that they are not logical, and the professed goals are either too vague or, if definite, are, as a general rule, not in accordance with the actions that are taken in practice, then Pareto is right, and the reformers and rationalists and moralists are wrong. Rational, deliberate, conscious belief does not then, in general at any rate, determine what is going to happen to society. Social man is not, as he has been defined for so many centuries, a primarily rational animal. When the reformers tell us that society can be improved by education, by increasing men's knowledge, by projecting the correct program, and then taking action to realize that program, they are wrong because men in society do not act that way. Their actions, their socially decisive actions, spring not from logical, but from non-logical roots. And just to break in, I can say that cancel culture is clearly, grossly illogical. And but no, we're supposed to be a rational society. Well, we're no longer a rational society, and soon I suppose we'll stop pretending to be rational. What we see with cancel culture is simply the imposition of power. It's that simple. Why do they do it? Because they can. Getting back to Burnham, this is not a question about which one opinion is good as another. Pareto presents evidence, a massive evidence, drawn not from one nation and one time, but from many nations and classes and cultures and times. If he is wrong, he can be proved wrong only by evidence equally cogent. But assuming that non-logical conduct is, on the whole, predominant in those actions that affect the course of history, we may legitimately wonder why this has not been widely recognized. Pareto readily grants that if non-logical actions are really as important as our induction so far would lead us to suppose, it would be strange indeed that the many men of talent who have applied themselves to the study of human societies should not have noticed them in any way. The fact is that many writers on society and many plain men and politicians, as well as even better, have observed the importance of non-logical conduct. Nevertheless, they have almost never been willing to generalize the legitimate inference from their observations. Something seems to block them from accepting the conclusions of their own inquiries. Pareto thinks that this is partly accounted for by the fact that few writers on society are content to describe and correlate facts, but are always going on to tell what ought to be and how to reform society. He remarks of Aristotle, who recognized but refused to be consistent in recognizing the importance of non-logical conduct. Had Aristotle held to the course he in part so admirably followed, we would have had a scientific sociology in his early day. Why did he not do so? There may have been many reasons, but chief among them probably was that eagerness for premature practical applications, which is ever obstructing the progress of science, along with a mania for preaching to people as to what they ought to do, an exceedingly bootless occupation, instead of finding out what they actually do. A desire to reform society seems to call for logical action, the deliberate adoption of suitable means to bring about the reforms. Therefore, those who wish above all for reform are likely in the end to minimize the influence of non-logical action. An even greater obstacle to understanding derives from the fact that we have a powerful non-logical impulse to make our own and other human actions seem logical. We are unable to accept non-logical actions for what they are, so we conjure up a rational explanation for them. A taboo arises in some obscure way against killing or incest, let us say. Later theorists give it a pseudo-logical explanation by saying that a god commanded and men accepted the command, whereas in reality the taboo long preceded any belief in a god. Still later, rationalist theories decide that the taboo was derived from the natural principle that men wish to live cooperatively in society, or from an awareness of the scientific truth, which they somehow discover that incest is biologically unsound. In fact, of course, no one dreamed of such principles or truths when the taboos arose, not to mention the fact that the pretended principles and truths are usually as absurd as the taboos themselves. Many Jews, following the lead given by the medieval rationalist Maimonides, explain that the Hebraic taboo against eating pork was really the means used in the days of the Old Testament to guard the people against the lack of refrigeration for keeping pig meat. With which explanation, which has not the remotest basis in historical evidence, the taboo becomes respectably logical. Or the principles of non-logical conduct are dismissed as unimportant, mere prejudices or absurdities or exceptions, or tricks used by chiefs or priests to deceive and rule their groups. Or various kinds of metaphysical and religious beings are invented, from whose nature and decrees the principles of non-logical conduct logically follow. Zeus or Poseidon or morality or truth or progress or natural law demands that this or that be done, which was being done from non-logical causes long before Zeus or progress was thought of. Or myths are taken as allegories or disguised historical facts, and thus are only picturesque versions of the logical. This tendency, however, to logicalize the non-logical leads us to Pareto's more general analysis of residues and derivations, and I will begin talking about that tomorrow. I should note, for those who may have raised an eyebrow with Burnham's comparison of the Nazis' treatment of the Jews and American treatment of blacks, that at the time that Burnham wrote this book, the existence of death camps was not known. In fact, the revelation of the existence of death camps in 1945 genuinely shocked the world. Let's go back to the chat. It puts the culture in the bucket, says Chogokin 666. That's a good one. Head McNeck says, at my local bar last night, ridiculousness was on. There were a dozen or more vids of people having diarrhea accidents in public. I could have used a damn trigger warning. Ugh. Yeah. 2021, the diarrhea games, says Chogokin 666. Palcaso 88 says, sponsored by Taco Bell. Okay. So what are we going to talk about now? Oh, yes, we're going to talk about Washington under siege. This is from Breitbart. The National Guard has been asked to stay in Washington, D.C. for another 60 days, a National Guard source confirmed to Breitbart News after Representative Alyssa Slotkin, Democrat of Michigan, stated Thursday afternoon that she was hearing from contacts about the request. Slotkin, a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a former Pentagon official, said she had heard from contacts of the National Guard that Capitol Police asked them to extend their mission for 60 days and that the Guard is soliciting states to send contributions. No one likes seeing the fortress-like security around the Capitol, and no one wants to again have a security problem in and around this symbolic place, Slotkin wrote on Twitter. I don't believe her. Slotkin added, but whether an extension has been requested or the mission is indeed terminating on March the 12th, it is critical that members of Congress get a briefing on what's behind these decisions. The Pentagon, as recently as Tuesday, said it had no additional requests from law enforcement authorities for an extension of the National Guard's mission to assist federal and local law enforcement, which was slated to end next week on March 12th. However, Capitol Police said on Wednesday they have information regarding a possible plot by a militant group to breach the Capitol on Thursday. How are they going to breach it? With magic powers? They're going to recruit an army, are they? Sufficient to deal with 4,900 National Guardsmen? Not bloody likely. The National Guard has been surrounding the U.S. Capitol in the wake of the January 6th breach of the building by pro-Trump protesters. Then Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller authorized 7,000 National Guard forces, and that number was raised to more than 26,000 for President Joe Biden's inauguration. Republican lawmakers have blasted the continued deployment, which to date has cost nearly $500 million in American taxpayers' fund. And why are they there? They are there they're a signifier. And what they signify is that Trump supporters are looking for a violent overthrow of the American government. That's the only reason why they are there. Now, people assembled in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th. And for mysterious reasons, and truly mysterious, the doors of the Capitol were opened to them. Glass was broken. Some laptops were stolen, some furniture was knocked over, and the like. Trump told these people to go home, and they went home. Rolf Kassemeyer tweets, Acting Capitol Police Chief Yogananda Pittman said during House testimony that her investigators had collected some concerning intelligence, but declined to provide any details publicly, saying that it was law enforcement sensitive. And that she, Yogananda Pittman, would provide a private briefing for the subcommittee members, the FBI and DHS. Also said that a group of militia extremists had been discussing trying to take control of the Capitol on March the 4th and encouraging thousands of people to come to D.C. Well, it is March the 4th now. Was there any such attempt? Kassemeyer concludes, to try to remove the Democrats from power. And he comments, do they know that they're getting cranked and pranked? Don't alarmist responses like this just incentivize bullshit? I've been thinking about this, the acting head of the Capitol Police, Yogananda Pittman, and how this black woman got this name. Years ago, decades ago, I guess it would have been in the hippy-dippy 60s and 70s, there was a very popular book called Autobiography of a Yogi, and it was by a fellow called Yogananda. And I suspect that Pittman's mother happened to see this book while pregnant, or before she got pregnant with her daughter, stored this up as an example of an exotic name. I mean, it's a real name. It's not made up. So that is my hypothesis. This is from AWR Hawkins on Breitbart. A report from the Washington Examiner's Byron York outlines January's Capitol rioters were armed with bear spray, not guns. York notes readers and news watchers may have the impression rioters had guns, as the riots are frequently described as an armed insurrection. In fact, York did a data search to find the phrase armed insurrection. It was used 2,339 times since January 6th to describe the riots. However, he points out that the armed insurrectionists did not use any firearms. What York did find is that a small number of those taking part in the riots did indeed have baseball bats or bear spray, and a few used flag sticks or even, in one case, a crutch as weapons to assault Capitol Police. And here's the ever-sober Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from January the 11th. We came close to half of the House nearly dying on Wednesday. York recounted a line of questioning Wednesday between Senator Ron Johnson and FBI Assistant Director for Counterterrorism Jill Sanborn about firearm arrests or shots fired during the Capitol riots. And what he learned, no firearms recovered. Yes, how many shots were fired of that we know of? Sanborn says, I believe the only shots that were fired were the ones that resulted in the death of the one lady. On January 6th, Breitbart reported the name of the woman who was killed was Ashley Babbitt, a 14-year-old veteran who served 4 tours with the U.S. Air Force. Her husband told KUSI that Babbitt was a strong supporter of President Trump and a great patriot to all who knew her. On February 2nd, NBC News reported no charges were being recommended for the Capitol police officer who fatally shot the Trump supporter. Curious, eh? Apparently, it was a black police officer. I suppose the optics would be bad if this police officer were to be charged, or even if there was a public investigation. According to the conservative treehouse, let us not mince words. This from Sundance. Late last night, the hardline leftists occupying the majority position by a slim 4-vote margin in the House of Representatives passed a bill on a party line vote, H.R. 1, which fully codifies and weaponizes all opportunities for, I'm not going to read the end of the sentence. Immediately after passing the election usurpation bill, the same House leaders then locked down the Capitol under the auspices of a fraudulent threat, and then requested a 60-day extension for the military to maintain their protective isolation behind fences and barbed wire. Charles Torot, a pseudonym, writes in American Thinker, it takes 3 days after any event to find out what happened and 30 days to find out what really happened. The dust storm of information and misinformation takes a while to settle in the perpetually online United States. The truth lodges in fewer places now. Emigres from the 1970 Soviet Union advised us that the only real information in Pravda lay between the lines. So it is with the bulk of U.S. media, which doesn't even try to hide its role as the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party anymore. After 60 days, what do we and don't we know about the events of January the 6th? What we don't know concerns me. When information that ought to be public isn't, there's a reason. It's seldom good. We know that there was no insurrection, coup, or sedition. Insurrection is an organized rebellion with the intent of toppling a government. A coup d'etat, or coup, is the seizure of political power by illegal or violent means. Insurrections and coups often involve the military. Always they involve weaponry. Sedition is the act of encouraging them. No one condones the events of January the 6th. I condemn them without equivocation. That said, neither an insurrection nor a coup took place, no matter how often politicians or their media sycophants parrot those words. No attempt was made to topple the government. Not a shot was fired by protesters. Of the hundreds of thousands who rallied, only a handful were arrested for bringing guns, and the FBI didn't recover any guns at all. What should we call the terrible events of that day? I'd call it a riot, albeit a small one. But the Associated Press prohibited that term in 2020, instead mandating unrest. AP covered a great deal of unrest this past year, accompanied by murder, arson, assault, and looting. 700 buildings were destroyed, 28 people died, hundreds of police officers were injured. Even when silhouetted against a skyline of flames, reporters invariably described the unrest as mostly peaceful. Following its own rules, the AP would have me call the events of January 6th the mostly peaceful unrest. We don't know how many forced their way inside. Charges have been filed against more than 300. We were told that would increase by an order of magnitude or more than 1,000. It will not. Because we've seen footage, we do know many were allowed into the Capitol calmly by law enforcement. They proceeded between velvet ropes in Statuary Hall on camera, damaging nothing. They broke no law. We do know that the charges filed against others, trespassing, disrupting an official proceeding, as is done routinely at the Kavanaugh hearings roughly every 10 minutes, disorderly conduct, and a few cases of destruction of property. 4 windows were broken. Some will be charged with assault on officers, a serious crime routinely ignored of late. At least one may have contributed to the subsequent death of Officer Brian Sicknick, tragically the most recent innocent victim of unrest. There is, alas, no autopsy or official cause of death for Sicknick. We don't know why police officers let protest in. They may have done so in defiance of orders. They may have been directed to. We've seen footage of the red-hatted protester screaming at a group of riot gear-clad officers to repel others, forcing their way in. This is the Capitol. Stop them. They do nothing. Why? We don't know that either. Dozens of Capitol Police are suspended and being investigated. Chief Stephen Sund resigned almost immediately, but maintains his department did not fail. We don't know why the Capitol wasn't better defended. We know Sund begged House officials prior to January 6th for reinforcements, including National Guard. Trump wanted to deploy 10,000 National Guard troops. All were turned down, reportedly because of optics. Additional law enforcement was deployed during BLM unrest last summer. We saw photos of them lining the Capitol steps, well equipped. We're told that the disparity was motivated by racism. That claim is preposterous. As for this being a false flag event, we do know that at least 3 such agents were present. One, unidentified, wears a black helmet with a Trump sticker. In the video, he breaks a window with his staff. He's wrestled down with shouts of "He's Antifa." 2 others were John Sullivan, a.k.a. Jaden X, a left-wing activist who urged the crowd forward, exhorting them to burn it down, and Jade Sackler, accompanying Sullivan and filming. Both appeared on CNN under misleading premises. They were paid an extraordinary $35,000 for the film by 2 network news sites. We've seen additional video from Sullivan's phone. He congratulates Sacker. "We did it." And "Is that the greatest film you've ever shot?" She's concerned when she realizes their exchange is being recorded. FBI Director Christopher Wray denies Antifa involvement. This comes as no surprise, as he believes Antifa is only an idea. Perhaps most of all, I'd like to know why a police officer dealing with unrest could fire a fatal shot at an unarmed woman without consequence. I'd also like to know the officer's identity. On any other occasion, we would. Police officers tell me that's often done before they finished the paperwork. The chilling phrase January 6th is now used to brand President Trump, Trump voters, conservatives, and Republicans as domestic terrorists, insurrectionists, and, in defiance of logic, white supremacists, a term properly reserved for fringe groups like neo-Nazis and the Klan. The unrest of January 6th was the most fortuitous possible event for the left, whose goal is to marginalize and silence anyone opposing their radical agenda. They will use it as a bludgeon with the tacit approval of many. Such events seldom happen by sheer luck. There is far too much we still don't know about this one. You know, we were lectured during the BLM riots last summer that these were not BLM riots. And in no way should the destruction be used to impugn the noble Black Lives Matter movement or the national state of mourning over the death of the sainted George Floyd. Fred Watson Jr. writes in the American Sun, if one walks the mall in Washington, D.C. today, one will come up to a tall fence with razor wire. This metal fence is supported by a row of jersey barriers behind it. Standing 50 feet or so behind this fence are members of the National Guard. This fencing goes on for blocks to the east and west of the focused target. The protected target is the U.S. Capitol building. This is a theatrical show of force for an imaginary threat. The defenses show how fast the system can build up protection. They can also fuel a problem that is not real yet, but may manifest itself in the future. No armed insurgents rioted in the capital on January 6th, yet the reaction is as if some did. The Department of Justice is pressing hard to get 300 people behind bars. Unarmed rioters who took selfies and clowned around will face jail time. When the punishment for being late is the same as rebellion, well, the Chinese generals said they might as well rebel. Signal and Telegram saw users spike after January 6th. All of these new users never thought of needing encrypted chat or messaging until the system showed them that they should consider it. Now, anyone leaning against the system now feels the need to act exactly like a true blue dissident or insurgent would act. The social aspect is a bigger feature of the change. With the rise of the volunteer thought police and woke SJW commissars in public life, as well as longhouse behavior in private life, right-wingers have already become careful with conversations. Those in industries that are dominated by the left have already learned the double life method. More right-wingers are picking up on this. These behaviors are shifting to be cautious about who to talk to and what subject matters to bring up. This is all practice of a double life before any real insurgency or disturbances have begun. He concludes, this double life training applied to half of a nation is a sickening situation. We have a systematic surveillance state of comms and an informal social surveillance network of behavior. The opinions of 2012 can cause loss of income and status, and one could argue that this applies to the opinions of 2015. The fever dream of the system is that armed white supremacists are going to storm capitals and kill them, arguably for the crimes they know they have committed, that every white driving behind a black woman is going to follow them home to murder them, or some other made-for Netflix scene. These are not real threats. The real danger is that in their hysteria, they're fostering behaviors in a benign population that will create a future insurgency or movement that the system will be unable to control. Did you know that there is a fundamentalist threat to the United States of America? Yeah. Someone called Jeff Charlotte tweeted today, QAnon shaman invoking God as a justification for participating in a murderous assault on the Capitol to recite Psalms in the Senate is not an aberration. This is the logic of Christian nationalism, no more nor less than that of Hawley, Cruz, Green, Pence, etc., etc. I responded to him, Christian nationalism, stop it, you're killing me. Do you do stand-up? So who is this Jeff Charlotte fellow? Well, he is the author of The Family, now a Netflix series. And what more can we find out about this man? Let's see. He is described by Wikipedia, born 1972, as an American academic, journalist, and author. Throughout his career, Charlotte's work has focused on religion, and apparently he's written for everybody. He has taught at New York University and at Dartmouth. He's the recipient of, numerous awards. He's the co-creator of 2 online journals, Killing the Buddha, a literary magazine about religion, and The Revealer, a review of religion and media, published by the New York University Center for Religion and Media. I bet this fellow describes himself as being an outsider. They all do. He is the former editor-in-chief of Cpac Traeger, a journal published by the National Yiddish Book Center. Charlotte's interest in religion developed during childhood. Charlotte's mother was from a Pentecostal Christian background. His father is of secular Jewish background. Raised in an eclectic religious environment, attending various people's churches and temples, he has said that he gravitates to stories about people's beliefs as the most natural way to engage the world. Charlotte was an executive producer of the 5-part Netflix series The Family, based on his books, The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. You know, having an unhappy childhood is a sad excuse for a worldview, but this is a condition that we see a great many times in these benighted times. From Kristen Taylor at the Gateway Pundit, YouTube has deleted all copies of President Trump's speech to Cpac given last Sunday in Orlando and has suspended the account of Right Side Broadcasting Network for 2 weeks as apparent punishment for live streaming the speech. YouTube took down videos from mainstream outlets, including the London Independent, which had over 1 million views, as well as Fox, Fox Business, ABC News, and the London Sun. A search of YouTube that earlier this week showed several channels with archived live streams of the speech now shows all archived live streams have been taken down. Trump's speech was wildly popular, with upward of over 30 million streaming views across several platforms being reported. CNN reported about 5.8 million viewers watched the speech on cable TV's Fox News channel, and another 1.5 million watched on Newsmax, making Trump's speech the most watched on all of cable for February and besting the Golden Globe Awards show on broadcast over the air on NBC later Sunday that was watched by 6.9 million viewers. But don't call it cancel culture. And this, I can hardly believe. This is from Natalie Winters at the National Pulse. The Twitter account of Andrew Breitbart, who passed away in March of 2012, no longer contains a blue check mark. Archived web pages of the legendary conservative journalist Twitter, however, show that his account had the symbol through at least January the 11th of this year. Can you, the pettiness of these people, perhaps this is a good thing. Because it's a commonplace that people will put up with, how would you say, profound outrages, but often it's the little things which leave them, fed up and unwilling to take any more. Oh, you're dead, and we took away your blue tick. Take that, dead man. Absolutely incredible. Okay, so in COVID news, the Daily Mail reports now is not the time to pull back. Dr. Anthony Fauci tells Texas and Mississippi residents to abide by federal measures as their Republican governors scrap COVID-19 restrictions, and Biden calls move to reopen, quote, Neanderthal thinking, unquote. Hey, Joe Biden, cool it with the anti-Neanderthal remarks. Okay? Really shocking. The following is not shocking at all, and this is from CNN. The risk of death from COVID-19 is about 10 times higher in countries where most of the population is overweight, according to a report released Wednesday by the World Obesity Forum. Researchers found that by the end of 2020, global COVID-19 death rates were more than 10 times higher in countries where more than half the adults are overweight. The team examined mortality data from Johns Hopkins University and the World Health Organization and found that of 2.5 million COVID-19 deaths reported by the end of February, 2.2 million were in countries where more than half the population is overweight. In an analysis of data and studies from more than 160 countries, the researchers found that COVID-19 mortality rates increased along with the country's prevalence of obesity. They note that this link persisted even after adjusting for age and national wealth. The report found that every country where less than 40% of the population was overweight had a very low COVID-19 death rate of no more than 10 people per 100,000. And in COVID-19 business news, this is from Catherine Rodriguez at Breitbart. Alamo Drafthouse, the popular dine-in theater chain based in Austin, Texas, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and announced the closure of 3 of its locations. The Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing would allow Alamo Drafthouse to get the money it needs to continue to stay open during the pandemic. And they're closing the flagship location in downtown Austin, another one in Texas, one in Kansas City, and they've halted development on a future Alamo Drafthouse in Orlando, Florida. Uh, yeah. So the movie theaters, are they ever going to come back? It's been I've seen it speculated that they'll be taken over by the movie studios, which I suppose means Disney. That would raise, I would say that would raise antitrust concerns. But in a country that took antitrust law seriously, to give one example, Disney would never have been allowed to take over Fox. So let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, which is today compiled by Will Jones. How the left flunked the lockdown challenge. A Lockdown Skeptics contributor, and as he puts it, working class revolutionary socialist Phil Shannon has a terrific piece in Left Lockdown Skeptics looking at how and why the left failed so badly when COVID hit. As a 4-decade veteran revolutionary working class socialist, it has dismayed me to see how the contemporary left, whether in government, in opposition, in the trade unions, on the activist fringes, or simply as liberal Guardian reading, BBC listening individuals, has almost uniformly become a noisy outpost of knee-trembling COVID hysterics who have embraced with disturbing relish the mania for lockdown. The left has become an auxiliary arm of the capitalist state, and its distinguishing feature has been to publicly promote earlier and longer lockdowns. Through its love of a lockdown which devastates the working class, lays waste to civil liberties, and disrespects science, the contemporary left well deserves to have quotation marks attached to it. Lockdown bills begin to arrive. In his budget yesterday, Chancellor Rishi Sunak brought the beginnings of realism to bear on the public finances after a year of make-believe economics. Will Canada ever again have a budget? It's been 2 years. I guess, they can just ignore that. Just keep putting out these updates. Kate explains that the tax hikes are not to pay off the mountainous debt, a political aspiration that has receded into the far future, but merely to tread water and service it. The bills are finally falling due, and it's not pretty. The unemployment bomb has been defeated once again with the extension of the furlough scheme, or universal basic income, to the autumn. That's a nettle no government wants to grasp, and it will be interesting to see what happens as the United Kingdom gets closer to September. And let's see, finally, on this subject, let's look at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Give me a second here. Okay. It's coming up now. Connecticut. Stephen Bognar reports Connecticut is lifting all capacity limits on restaurants, retail, libraries, personal services, indoor recreation, gyms, museums, offices, and houses of worship. Well, that's good news. That's good news. And Berenson comments, wow, this is even bigger than Texas. CNN had tweeted the United States shouldn't ease restrictions in place to prevent COVID-19 before the number of new coronavirus cases falls below 10,000 daily, and maybe even considerably less than that, Dr. Fauci says. Berenson comments, bulletin from Anthony Fauci, I'm not finished with you yet, peasants. This isn't over until I say it's over. Besides, Birx and I have a bet to settle. Is that rain? No, I'm melting. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Governor Mike DeWine tweets, new, when Ohio gets down to 50 cases per 100,000 people for 2 weeks, all health orders will come off. Cases per 100,000 people for a 2-week period is a standard measure we have used since early in the pandemic. Berenson comments, this one still doesn't get that the time for pretending is over. Amazing that once the polls changed, the science did too. Remember all those color-coded metrics for reopening? Yeah, the governments don't either. And I'm going to move on now to Theater Thursday. and talking about a film from 1966 called Blow Up, which is directed by Michelangelo Antonioni. This was not a film that I saw at the time. I don't know that I would have appreciated it. But I will say that I was interested in the film. One of the reasons I was interested in the film was because of the Mad Magazine parody, which was called, and of course it was called, Throw Up, which was written by comedy writer Arnie Kogan, who wrote for Jackie Gleason and a lot of other big comics. He wrote for the Carol Burnett Show, and his son, Jay Kogan, was associated with The Simpsons for many years. I was also interested in the film. Well, yes, the Mad Magazine parody included a, well, how would you say, a bowdlerized version of the infamous purple paper scene, which certainly piqued my interest. It was playing in North Vancouver, where I was living at the time, at the Totem Theatre on Lonsdale Street. And I made a habit of making a considerable detour every day to walk past the theater, because theaters in the old days, they would put what they called lobby cards, which were stills from the movies. And there was a lobby card from Blow Up of Vanessa Redgrave naked from the waist up, covering herself with her crossed arms, a picture that made me feel funny, as they say. Yeah, the movie was restricted. It certainly wouldn't be restricted now. It would be what, PG-13, I suppose. And back in those days, and for some time afterwards, restricted films, restricted to those of 18 or over, they had a little cartoon that ran before them, and for the previews for restricted films, it's very famous. You can find it on YouTube. You see a little blue, like cute, cuddly kitten, a little overgrown, a cub, I suppose you could say, or some such, traveling through a jungle, and then it transmogrifies with a roar, into a huge black panther. This film is restricted. Their official restricted symbol had a little black panther in it. And I remember seeing this as a child and thinking, oh my God, just the wonders. What is in these restricted films? It made it seem very, very appealing indeed. So Michelangelo Antonioni lived from 1912 to 2007. And I suppose he is most highly regarded for the films that he made with the exquisite Monica Vitti, L'Avventura, La Notte, and L'Eclisse. Blow Up was his first English language film. He made others, including the completely insane Zabriskie Point, and then The Passenger with Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider. Apart from Blow Up, which was a huge success, his English language films were not particularly successful. Blow Up is, the screenplay is by Tonino Guerra and Antonioni. Antonioni's English was never good, so he was helped in the English dialogue by the playwright Edward Bond, who was one of the most scandalous playwrights of the 1960s. I mean, he was sort of a binary division, because many people thought, particularly his play, 1965 play, Saved, that you either loved him or you hated him. And the film is based on a short story by Julio Cortázar. It stars David Hemmings, who had a rather remarkable life. He was not working class, which distinguishes him from almost all of the British actors who became famous in the 1960s. You can, despite his use of the interjection or imperative "oi" frequently in the film, he has a very distinct, even sometimes clipped voice. He's not pillow mouthed like Mick Jagger and with his mockney. If you read Christopher Booker's book, The Neophiliacs, you can read about how the vigorous, vital working class took over English society in the decades following the Second World War. And just such a working class photographer, David Bailey, I suppose Hemmings' character in Blow Up is largely based on. Hemmings was associated very closely with the great English composer Benjamin Britten because he was a boy soprano. After it was revealed that Britten was a pederast, there was suspicion that Hemmings had been fiddled with by Britten, but he denied it, said that there was nothing to it, that Britten was always gentlemanly with him. Hemmings was unapproachably heterosexual. In fact, his girl craziness led to him never being able to keep up a marriage. This film made him a star, and he later became a director in Hollywood, a TV director, the A-Team, and Magnum PI, and such like. Of course, he started as a singer, and he recorded a pop album in 1967 where he was backed by Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman of the Byrds. He was not as successful as, say, Richard Harris was. The film also stars Vanessa Redgrave of the famous Redgrave family, and I suppose she is notorious for her pro-Palestinian activism. This film made her a star as well. I notice the posters that I've seen, or many of them, she gets star billing ahead of David Hemmings. Although this is, very much David Hemmings' film. I say about Hemmings that it's rather odd. I suppose this film is sort of on the cusp before the youth movement became hippie-ish. That you see Harry Enfield. He made a parody of these sort of 60s films where the male characters are, shall we say, rather beastly towards women. You can think of Michael Caine and Alfie as another example. But Hemmings is so masculine in this film, which he can get away with wearing white trousers, which is a very rare feat for a man. Sarah Miles is also in this film, and Sarah Miles, the combination of beauty and sensuality in her is really quite remarkable. Jane Birkin is one of the two girls who is hounding David Hemmings' character. They want to get into the modeling business. Birkin was known as the most beautiful woman in the world. She was married to the composer John Barry of James Bond and other fame. She lived with Serge Gainsbourg for 12 years, and they produced a daughter, Charlotte Gainsbourg, whose recordings, she's also an actress, but whose recordings I rate very highly indeed. The other one of the girls is Gillian Hills. Remarkable life, and she was the daughter of seemingly a character from fiction, Dennis Hills, who was involved in adventures all over the world, military and otherwise, and found himself condemned to death by Idi Amin, and was saved only when the Queen made a personal intervention. Gillian Hills was featured in Life magazine when she was 15 years old, in a picture that I put up on my Twitter feed. that she started acting at 14. She became a yeye star in France in the 1960s, and one of her hits was called Zooby Zooby Zoo, Little Kiss, which you might remember from Mad Men. That she also appears in A Clockwork Orange as one of the two girls that Alex chats up in the Chelsea drugstore. Peter Bowles, old pro actor who was pretty young at the time, is in this. The legendary model Verushka plays herself. And of course, it is Verushka's role in this film that led to, well, a meme, the meme of the fashion photographer. More, give me more. Yes, I love it. I love it. That Mike Myers, pretty much based his, his career on this, or his successful movie career in any event. I was watching the film again last night, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed before, that in the scene where Vanessa Redgrave's character disappears, literally, he goes and looks for her, and he stops at a narrow street, and I thought to myself, I know that street. It's the Ziggy Stardust street. It's the street where the famed album cover for Ziggy Stardust was shot, and you can see one of Giles Gilbert Scott's famous red telephone booths at the end of the street. The film features music the score is by Herbie, or Herbert, as he is credited, Hancock, a legendary jazz man, who also did Death Wish back in his early days before he became, well, a pop star. And it's got the cream of the crop of American jazzmen playing on it. And the film also features a legendary appearance by the Yardbirds. During that small period of time when both Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck played guitar in the group. I don't know, the Yardbirds are not very well known all of these days. This is the band that made Eric Clapton famous as Slow Hand, or Clapton is God, was scrawled across London. Clapton quit the group when they had the big hit For Your Love. It has a harpsichord in it and was written by Graham Gouldman, later of 10cc. It was too commercial for him. He was a blues purist. Jeff Beck took over his place, and briefly Jimmy Page joined the band. You see them playing a version of their song Stroll On, which is a shameless ripoff of the song Train Kept a Rollin'. Now, there's a strange thing in the scene with the Yardbirds. Jeff Beck famously smashes his guitar in frustration because all he's getting from it is feedback, intermittent blipping sounds, and that he crushes it with his foot and throws pieces out to the audience, which incites a frenzy. But it's a very odd guitar that he breaks up. It's a Gibson Archtop, and that's not Jeff Beck's guitar. Beck would have been playing a solid body guitar, a Telecaster, much harder, to smash. But why did this come about? Because the band Tomorrow was originally supposed to play, and then they got the Yardbirds, who were a much bigger name, and Steve Howe, who was the guitarist of Tomorrow and later the guitarist famously of Yes and Asia. He played a Gibson Archtop, and so they made several copies of it for this film. But then they fired Tomorrow and brought the Yardbirds in, but they still had the mock guitars. So that explains that scene. In that scene, you can see, and I put a picture up on my Twitter account, the one that announces this edition of the live stream. You can see in the crowd at the Ricky Tick Club a young, quite young, sullen-looking Michael Palin. I guess this was, 3 years before Monty Python. You can also see dancing in an outrageous outfit, Janet Street Porter, who later became one of England's most famous journalists, a position that she retains. Oh, one more thing about the Mad Magazine parody, that it says, that the only reason that there's this nudity in Carrying On is because Carlo Ponti produced the film, and he insisted upon it, so that the film would have make more of a sensation and have a bigger box office. And I thought, wow, Carlo Ponti reference, that's pretty sophisticated for a children's comic book. So, what is this film about? It's about a lot of things, but first above all, I would say it's about evanescence, particularly the evanescence of knowledge. How do we know what we know? It's about other kinds of evanescence as well. It's about evanescence of affection, evanescence of life itself. We have people disappearing. Well, 2 people disappear in this film. Now, there is some narrative discontinuity in Blow Up, which came about by accident, as is the case in many films, that you see fragments of larger scenes that were cut for budgetary reasons. Now, this makes the plot flawed, but I think it's worth it because, again, it heightens the ambiguity of this movie. This is a very meta movie, and I suppose one of the first meta movies, because it examines not so much the thing itself, but the examination of the thing itself. David Hemming's character is a photographer. He is a voyeur. And like Psycho and like Peeping Tom, this film makes us, the audience, into voyeurs as well. Everything seems to happen second hand. And the film begins with a scene. Well, it begins with 2 scenes of fakery, and it ends with a scene of fakery. But by the end of the film, we're not really convinced what is real and what is fake. It's a English university tradition upon graduation, Rag Week, where the students would put on white face. They'd make themselves, look like Pierrot. And they'd drive around and, make noise and act silly and beg for alms. A jolly habit. I'm sure it died out a long time ago. And at the same time, while we are seeing these jolly students, we are introduced to David Hemmings in a totally false situation. This isn't introduced to us. We get it in media res. We see him walking, looking exceedingly bedraggled in filthy clothes out of what is called a doss house. And a doss house, it was a place where homeless people, or people who couldn't afford hotels, would sleep for the night in rather ghastly conditions, and would often pick up fleas, lice, and the like. You see a doss house in Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, which was made 5 years after this film. Hemmings is a voyeur in this place because he has brought his camera in order to get unposed pictures of these derelicts or these sad men who've fallen on hard times. Hemmings is a fashion photographer and clearly one of the top ones in England, but he is also an art photographer as well, also a cinema verite photographer. But his appreciation of life, again, it seems to be at second hand. He's talking to his manager / agent. He's raving about these films that he that these pictures of the Doss house that he has taken, and they're really quite good. That he's sick of London, and his manager looks not impressed by this. What was it? Dr. Johnson said that a man who is tired of London is tired of life. Well, I don't know. This was the London of 1966, a London which has vanished. It's all kebab shops and Nigerians with knives now. But David Hemmings says that he's sick of it, and he sees some woman dressed in fashionable clothing sort of do a strange walk in front of him. She may have recognized him, and he says that he's sick of the bitches, and he tells his manager that he wants a lot of money, and then he can be free. And his manager says, displaying considerable amount of insight, pointing to the desperate poor man that he's taken a photograph of, free like him. The characters in this movie want to escape. Vanessa Redgrave's character is trying to escape from something or other, trying to escape from a boyfriend, trying to escape from a marriage. Sarah Miles, who lives next door to David Hemmings' character in a real life residence, this fabulous pad, which is living quarters plus a photographer's studio, plus all of the equipment therein. And next door is a painter, and Sarah Miles is with him. And it's clear that David Hemmings is very strongly attracted to her. She's attracted to him too. He asks her, will you leave him? And she says no, but she's on the verge of asking Hemmings for help. She has some terrible problem, probably involving escape. But Hemmings doesn't have a chance to further this up. He's interrupted. He's a very busy man. In fact, he says that he's so busy he doesn't have time to have his appendix taken out. We see at the beginning of the film the next door neighbor, Bill, the painter, a pointillist painting, which is pretty much points, different colored points. And Hemmings is very much taken with this picture, and he wants to buy it. The painter says no. He says, will you give it to me? No. We don't know why. But you can see here that Hemmings is seeing the parallel with photography, because if you look closer and closer and closer to a photograph, you end up looking at points, at pixels. And we see this literally occur or be recreated later in the film. Now, Hemmings is, we see that he's something of a hustler. He drives a Rolls-Royce convertible with a radio telephone, which must have been quite the thing in 1966. And he's fascinated by an antique shop. He wants to buy the property. It's not made clear, but it seems that he wants to knock it down and replace it with something, because the neighborhood in which he lives, it's becoming fashionable, so much so that he says to his manager, I've already seen 2 queers with poodles. Yes, that's how fashionable it is, and he thinks he can make a killing. Did I mention that Antonioni had a great love for female beauty? We see 3 beautiful women in this film, and one of them is the woman who owns the antique shop. She wants to escape too, because she's sick of antiques. Of course, antiques are relics, and I'll get back to that in a minute. And where does she want to go? Hemmings asks, and she says Nepal, and he says, Nepal? It's all antiques there. And she seems rather surprised by this. Yes, relics. That a photograph is not. It's not reality, of course. It's a depiction of reality, a relic of reality, if you like. If you in the scene with the Yardbirds, after Jeff Beck has smashed his guitar, he throws it into the audience, which goes crazy. Now, Antonioni has made the audience still and sullen, as I mentioned. The Yardbirds, who are the most high energy act in the United Kingdom, perhaps the world, are playing, and the audience is just staring blankly ahead. It's only after Jeff Beck has created a relic that the crowd becomes interested, becomes excited, becomes frantic. And everyone is pawing for this, and David Hemmings gets it. And he is chased out of the club and onto the street by people who want this relic. Well, he's got the neck and the head of Jeff Beck's guitar, and when he finds himself in the street, he looks at it, and what do I want this for? So he throws it on to the street. Now, Hemmings goes to a park, a local park, and he takes some pictures. And I cannot praise highly enough the sound design in the scenes in this park, or in the scenes later where we see pictures of the park, because it's a windy day. And Antonioni very smartly does not use any soundtrack music, nothing by Hancock or The Loving Spoonful or anything like that. We just hear the susurration of the leaves from the wind. And it's a haunting effect. So Hemmings is taking pictures, and he notices a beautiful young woman played by Vanessa Redgrave, who is with a man, and an older man, and they are having some sort of tryst. And Hemmings is fascinated by this. You know, he's captured something real, and he takes pictures of this. He hides behind a fence, hides behind a tree. And Vanessa Redgrave notices what he's done, and she commands him to stop and chases after him. And he says, "It's my job. You know, I'm a photographer." And she demands the film. And Hemmings isn't going to give them to her. And he says, I'll let you, have a look after I've developed the photographs. And she's insistent about this. And she shows up at his apartment. Now, how she knew where he lived remains a mystery. And there's an awkward sort of seduction of him by her that takes place, with her at one point, as previously mentioned, removing her blouse. She's not wearing a bra. And it would appear that she is willing to trade sex for these photographs. Well, Hemmings, as I say, is a meta man, and he would rather have the photographs than the sex. She tries to steal it, and Hemmings is on to her. He gives her another roll of film, not the role taken in the park. So Hemmings realizes that there must be something terribly important. What's so important about these pictures? A woman in a park with an older man. Well, you would see thousands of such examples in London every day. So he develops the photographs, and he notices something strange. There appears to be a man hiding in the leaves of the trees. And later it appears that there is a dead man on the ground, and that Vanessa Redgrave is pointing to this man in the trees. And apparently there's been a murder. By whom, for what reason, remains unknown. But we see this galvanizes Hemmings' character, who had been, you could say characterized by anomie, except perhaps in the notorious purple paper scene. And so he determined to use his skills as a photographer and as a developer to unravel this mystery. But as I mentioned previously with the Pointillist painting at the beginning of the film, the closer that he gets to it, the less real it appears. Just a series of pixels. He cuts out a section of one of these pictures and blows it up further, and it becomes almost completely amorphous. But he is convinced that he has discovered a murder. He leaves his apartment, he comes back, and all of the photographs, except one not particularly interesting one, have been stolen. And someone had been mucking around with his car looking for these photographs. So is this a murder plot? How many people are involved? Is Vanessa Redgrave part of this? He goes to the park and he sees a dead man. He hasn't brought his camera and he doesn't know what to do. And so he seeks advice from his manager. He was at a party, and everyone at this party is so stoned on marijuana that they're useless. He later goes back to the park, and the body is gone. And he believes that he saw a dead man, that he saw a murder, that he had evidence of it. But now it's all vanished. And I mentioned the evanescence of knowledge. When someone says that they saw something, I mean, that's merely a claim. And of course, often people claim to see things that they didn't see. Often people are mistaken in this regard. And so at the end of the film, we see Hemmings in the park, and we see the Rag Week students from uni, and they descend en masse on a tennis court. And they've got the proper makeup for it, the mime makeup, and they mime a tennis match. And they go so far as to hit one of the balls over the netting so it lands on the grass, and they mutely ask Hemmings to throw it back. And he laughs, and he picks up the imaginary ball, and he throws it back. And then he turns around, and he hears the noise of a ball hitting a racket, which disturbs him. Previously, we just heard their footsteps, but now we hear what appears to be a real tennis match, although we know that there are no tennis players there. And so that's how the film ends, with this extreme ambiguity that Antonioni was not interested in didactic filmmaking or pressing a message on people. He wanted to excite people's emotions. He would go so far, and he does in Blow Up. He paints an entire street red simply in order to heighten emotion. This is a very thrilling film to watch. I mean, visually, you can see that Antonioni he doesn't look at the places that he's shooting. Every film has to be shot somewhere. It has to be shot in a studio or on location. Well, Antonioni was determined to make the most of his locations because he was fascinated by the way that people lived, by the structures that they put up. And you see fashionable London, you see Regent Street, you see Carnaby Street, you see the East End, you see buildings that have been pulled down, you see brutalist monstrosities, and you see very charming Victorian architecture. Antonioni seemed to love all of it, and what one gets from this film, well, certainly what I got from it watching it, was a feeling of a great vitality. It's not just because the film came out when I was a child, but I felt as if I were a young man again. And young men typically they are more thrilled by their surroundings than old men, because much of their surroundings are new to them or not old hat. But for Antonioni to pull this off in the context of a film is it's rare. and it is exceedingly exciting. And for all of the reasons that I have mentioned, I think very highly this film. I put together a list of my favorite 52 films a few years ago, and this film was on it. It's a beautiful film. It's exceedingly well acted, directed, and the music is great, and it is genuinely thought provoking. So those are my thoughts on Antonioni's Blow Up. Let's go to the chat. Anarin says, I've never seen so much devil's parsley smoking in one scene. It's a curious thing in the movie because in the scene, as I say, this sort of bungled seduction of Hemmings by Vanessa Redgrave, Hemmings offers, he says you can smoke, and he offers her a cigarette, but it looks like it's a machine-made cigarette. And of course, marijuana does not come in machine-made cigarettes, or at least it certainly didn't in 1966. And I see a similar thing in the party scene that, I know what marijuana cigarettes look like. I know what joints look like, and these don't look like any joints I've ever seen. Of course, there's another note of unreality in the party scene where you see a woman successfully rolling a joint, and I don't believe that has ever been accomplished. Roulette Crack says, I used to make roll-ups for my granddad. Well, I'll tell you a story. I love French cigarettes and used to be able to buy them in Canada for many decades, and then you couldn't anymore. But you could still buy the loose tobacco for a gitan. And I bought these various machines, and it's just hopeless at it. And I had a friend who was a smoker, and I told him about this, and he said, I'll make the cigarettes for you. I said, you will? Yeah. So I figured, he must be good at it. So a few days later, I dropped by his place, and he gives me the tin, and I open it up, and all of the tobacco has been used to make what appear to be machine-made cigarettes. Okay. I was astonished. I said, how did you get to be so good at rolling cigarettes? I've never seen rolled cigarettes like this before. And he said, I used to have to make cigarettes for my father. And I got the impression that his father was pretty exacting in that regard. Josh Randall disavows Kevin can roll a perfect J. No, I have never smoked marijuana. And as previously mentioned, I cannot roll cigarettes. I just can't do it. Judas Fly Chai says, so KMG is gushing over an old movie that I can't identify and will never see. It's called Blow Up. It's available on the Criterion Collection. Yes, I should mention that. Typically a fine job by the Criterion Collection with an hour-long doc. Well, it's the transfer is beautiful, and as one normally expects from Criterion. And it has an hour-long documentary on Antonioni. And it has the usual features, as well as an essay, a printed essay. Yes, and there are interviews of with Vanessa Redgrave, David Hemmings, and Jane Birkin. I should mention something about nudity. I should have mentioned that earlier. There is some small nudity in this film. As I say, this would be PG-13 today, but it caused a sensation at the time, and it was not distributed under the MPAA at the time, the ratings board. It was considered too risque for that. A strange situation in the middle to late 60s that you could see there was this kind of hysteria that had been built up about nudity, and various filmmakers were seeing how far they could push it. It's like, oh, what was that? That? You see this most hilariously in Roger Vadim's Barbarella with Jane Fonda. And I've seen, apparently, if you advance frame by frame through this film, Apparently, in the purple paper scene, there are what, 2 or 3 frames of pubic hair or something, But the weird thing is that you see this water rising, in a dam, and by 1970 the dam had burst. So every film, it seemed, that wasn't explicitly made for children had nudity in it. It just, oh, wow, we're certainly seeing a lot of strip clubs and movies these days. Or, yes, here's a woman, and she's left work or university or whatever, and she's come home. When she takes off her shoes and puts down her purse, and she goes into the bedroom, and she takes off all of her clothes. Yes, okay, she's getting changed. Is there any particular reason we need to see that? No, there's no particular reason. It's just that, well, now that we can have nudity, I guess every film is going to have nudity. And that regime lasted for about 5 years. It seems rather comical in retrospect. Zabriskie Point, well, yeah, as I say, it's completely nuts. And it stars, member of a particularly bizarre cult? All right. Do we have anything else here? So David Hemming's character is a nut? No, I don't think that he's a nut. I think that he is just terribly troubled by his experiences of, 2 days? I guess it would be. I mean, I suppose he'd probably never seen a dead body before. People used to see a lot more dead bodies then than they do now. There's many people who go through their entire life without seeing a dead body now. Anran says, could she have got the info from the guy snooping around Hemming's car? It looks like she might have been in one of the cars behind Hemming's rolls when he came home from the restaurant. Yes, this is the fractured narrative that I talk about. That there's clearly a whole bunch of scenes that were cut or were scripted and not shot in the film. Who the fellow is snooping around the Rolls Royce? Well, the Rolls Royce was hilarious to me. That a car like that in London today would be stripped down in about 30 seconds after he got out of it. But you see how free and easy things were, even as late as 1966. The Yardbirds would have blown the Stones off the stage in 65, 66, a lot tighter and higher energy. Yeah. I don't know. You see, the Yardbirds and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, you go from the Yardbirds and you end up with Led Zeppelin directly through Jimmy Page's version of the Yardbirds, which was called The New Yardbirds. But Jeff Beck made a record, in 1968 called Truth, which could be considered the first heavy rock record, definitely a precursor to Led Zeppelin. But the Yardbirds had Keith Relf as a singer. Now, I like him just fine, but Jeff Beck had Rod Stewart, and of course, Led Zeppelin had Robert Plant. So there's no comparison there. Keith Relf wasn't particularly much of a big figure on stage either. I mean, I love the Yardbirds, and they were a great singles band above all, I suppose. The Painter was the middle brother in The Lion in Winter. Yes, I saw that. I saw that. Enron says, Kevin, we see little snippets of diversity. 2 black nuns. Yes, I noticed that. A man in a turban, 4 men in African dress. Yes, 4 men in African dress. One used to see, I don't know, at the University of London or whatever, students, African students who would dress in African dress. But given that Dr. Seuss is being canceled because he shows a Chinese man with a conical hat eating rice out of a bowl, is this scene with the nuns and the African students, is that going to be chopped from streaming versions? Hauper says most of Jack the Ripper's destitute victims were living in doss houses. Enron says, I would have liked Blow Up better if Hemming's character was a little more appealing. Perhaps it is too harsh to call him a jerk, but he wasn't likable. Yeah, I don't know. We're not, I mean, how much of him is actually revealed? That he gets rude with models who he thinks who aren't up to snuff, you know? He seems, he gets along very well with Verushka. You can tell that. I mean, he loves her. That he was off-putting to the two teenage girls, you know? Well, you know, he's tired of this. You're a well-known photographer, and women, they want to be in the fashion magazines, and clearly, you know, they're willing to exchange favors for this. He seems charming enough with the beautiful woman who owns the antique shop. Yeah, I don't know. He's not as horrible a person, say, as Alfie is. I suppose my reaction to this is perhaps based on the fact that I'm fed up with effeminate men in leading roles in film now. I'm looking at you, Ryan Reynolds. How did that ever happen? But there are many such cases, as Donald Trump would say. What is the point of the Yardbird scene? Well, the point of the Yardbird scene is this notion of the relic, you know, that the audience doesn't seem to be interested in the immediacy of a band playing, you know, excitingly for them. They become interested only when a relic of it, something secondhand, is produced. Yeah, I like the old man in the antique shop. Landscapes, we have no landscapes. Statues, we have no statues. No, nothing's for sale here. You scruffy youngster. Actually, by the standards of the time, Hemming's character doesn't look scruffy at all, really. He's wearing a very handsome, no doubt expensive, light blue check shirt and a blue, it could be a velvet sports jacket. He's got polished boots with Cuban heels, or PR shoes, as Lou Reed would say. Beck actually played an Esquire. Yeah, I know that. That's what he started with, but with Tridents. But at the time, you know, I spent some time looking this up. I think at the time that this film was made, he was probably playing a Telecaster, but I could be wrong. Okay. I think that's it then. Blow Up inspired Coppola's The Conversation. Yes, indeed. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about a book which I enjoyed a great deal. It's called Boomers by Helen Andrews. And next week on Theatre Thursday, I'm going to be discussing a comedy from Ireland from 2011 called The Guard, directed by John Michael McDonough. I'll be back on the air tomorrow, Friday, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly welcome, well appreciated, and perhaps, you know, quite necessary at this time. My PayPal account is attached to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream can be made via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.